And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. Tonight at Hyde Park, we'll talk about Sri Lanka's economic path to recovery and prosperity. Of course, as we are at a critical juncture, the question is whether Sri Lanka's startup industry can help boost economic revival, whether this could be the game changer for Sri Lanka's economy. To discuss all this, I've invited to our studios a panel that is well placed to discuss this topic. Let me very warmly welcome to our studios Dr. Harsha Subasinghe, who's joining us tonight, a technology entrepreneur and ecosystem builder known for pioneering global tech ventures from Sri Lanka. We also have tonight Mr. Heminda Jayaweera, a digital transformation strategist focused on strengthening Sri Lanka's tech and startup ecosystem. And last but not least, joining us tonight, Dr. Sankalpa Gamwarige, an investment innovation leader who's working with high growth ventures and emerging enterprises. And the topic tonight is whether Sri Lanka is positioned for a startup boom and a global breakthrough. Well, I'd like to open the panel with that basic question. You all talk about this. You all work with startups. You all work with policymakers as well to build that ecosystem. I'll talk with Harsha first. Is Sri Lanka's innovation startup culture geared towards supporting economic transformation?
Right. So it's a kind of a discussion that we can have it for long time, but I try to cut it down as short as possible. So what happens is, like, if you take Sri Lanka, the innovation in Sri Lanka, there are a few things. One is actually, the Sri Lanka is actually naturally blessed to have fresh water. And then, pretty much like we grow anything and it just grows in this country. So the food security is also there. And then also, you get the solar all the time, so that you get the energy security. And if you have, maybe if you have the electric transportation, then your transportation is also free. So the basic things are pretty much free. And then even we were actually working on low-cost housing and something called affordable housing, so that housing can be much cheaper than spending about 14,000 rupees to about like 6,000 rupees a square foot. If you do that, so the total cost of living is going to be quite less. So if that is the case, all the engineers and all the entrepreneurs and all the creative people who works in this country, they can live for cheaper than anywhere else in the world. And then we as a company, we started developing so many different products. I mean, we proved that we can build supercars here, we can build three-wheelers here, we can build cars here, we can build best motorbikes in here. These are like, our three-wheelers are like kind of the #1 three-wheel in the world right now in the looks and feels and safety and performance. And similarly on the motorbikes as well. So we're actually not going to sort of local, cheap kind of products, but we are going for like high-end products. So because of that reason, we believe that Sri Lankan engineers are capable of developing world-class products. So if you go into this world-class product, and development on startups, and then also we are heavily investing on AI, because you can see that traditional software markets, traditional technology market is actually disappearing. Every single thing is now AI, so that we can adapt to the AI system, and then we can create AI solutions much cheaper than anywhere else in the world. Because if I go there and develop something in say like in UK, the same price I can do about 10 products in this country. So likewise, not only the automobile industry, but if you go there and look at the things like chemical industry and look at the battery manufacturing in this country, and especially if you go there and look at the herbal industry, herbal market itself. So if you go there and look at, we have thousands of years of history of herbal medicine. So if you go there and look at all that facilities, all that knowledge that we have, we as Sri Lankans, we can actually make from those startups. So Sri Lankan economy is at about $85 billion or so. So our aim is to increase for about $140 billion. So out of that, electric mobility, we can take about $8-9 billion. Batteries and charge energy tech, can be $5-60 billion. Agriculture and wellness exports, which is about $9 to $12 billion. Herbal medicine and natural health will be about $5 to $8 billion. And you call it the wisdom and ecotourism, because we are just having a sunseeing and tourism, but we can actually move into kind of a very much of a wisdom driven, because we are actually having a lot of Buddhist heritage in this country, where we were actually one of the pioneers in developing wisdom, and it has been known as a country for wisdom. When the people doesn't have it, and then that is what we can do, and they can promote that, and that's a huge amount of money where you can make about $68 billion. And AI and robotics is a brand new one, including eVTOLs and stuff like that. So that's about $2 billion market where we can capture. So you're talking about, we can capture about $30 to $35 billion, you know, within the next 5 to 6 years, if the policies are right, if the people's mindset has been changed. So that way that we can shift the $85 billion to $90 billion economy to about $140 billion. Saying that, we don't have to go for these hefty taxes right now, which is unfavorable. And then I'll talk to you about that one later.
Yes.
But we can go into sort of lean kind of tax structure that actually help every one of them. So in theoretically, we can, our startup ecosystem, our people's brains, our minds, and changing the mindset, of course, we can bring it up to about $130 to $150 billion within about next 5 to 6 years, if you play our craft right.
You mentioned 150, 40, 50, the rate
130 to 150 billion dollars.
Dollars in the next 5 years. I intend talking about taxes and policies as we move forward. I'd like to turn to Heminda. From this game of survival as an economy, can this culture of startups, innovation, and thinking out of our comfort zone, can it really transform our economy, or is this what we can really, the maximum we can do?
So I'm fully agree what Harsha said, but I just want to add a few things. Now, these are the things now, I'm being part of TRACE, I get to connect a lot of this, not Sri Lankan, but European, US startups. And a lot of these startups, what they say is, they want to come to Sri Lanka, not to market to Sri Lanka, but what they think is, now we are in the middle of South Asia. And the South Asian market, if you look at it, is 25% of the global population, and obviously fastest growing middle income economy, I mean, if you look at it as a region. And they want to come and establish in South Asia to market their products globally, or South Asia. So they have really identified Sri Lanka as a neutral country. So they think if they come to Sri Lanka, then they can market to entire South Asia. So Sri Lanka is already looked as a hub. But obviously, again, if we can come to problems, if they want to establish here, there are a lot of other issues, like establishing a foreign company in Sri Lanka. There are so many, gatekeepers, bottlenecks. So those are the things that we have to look at. So the potential, maybe we have not identified Sri Lanka as a country, but the outsiders, the technology, I'm not talking this buy and selling companies, I'm talking to this technology-oriented, innovation-oriented startups and companies. They wanted to come to Sri Lanka. And so now imagine what we are doing as a Sri Lankan startup. So we always had that potential, but not looking at Sri Lankan market. Maybe Sri Lankan market could be our test market, but we are sitting in the epicenter of the world economy right now. I mean, it was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it was somewhere there, but now it's coming back to the South Asian region. So we are in the epicenter. If you look at, as Harsha mentioned, our brain power to our resources to everything, we can create billion-dollar startups here. I mean, I'm not saying decades and decades. Within 5 to 10 years, we can create those. So I think the potential-wise, we have everything. But there are few structural, maybe some cultural changes that need to be done. That as a country, together we have to do all these changes in the next couple of years.
Did you say structural or cultural?
Both. There are cultural aspects as well. For example, we have to celebrate entrepreneurs. I mean, entrepreneurship is the engine of growth, but culturally we are not aligned towards that. We think entrepreneurs are like below a certain level. We have to change that attitude, and we have to change our education system. There are a lot of things that we need to do, might take a bit longer, but then there are structural issues also when it comes to investment, to what Harsha mentioned, the tariff and all that. Those need to change as well, really fast.
And turning to Sankalpa, I think as we talk about building a future, we have to also not miss on the talent, whether there is enough support here to retain the kind of talent that we're looking at if we want to spur an entrepreneurship culture in Sri Lanka.
So I think talent is the key aspect for any country to develop, either to as startups or even getting the FDIs to whatever things. It's a right set of people who would be able to really build things and transform things. And same time, this particular talent, I think, being right now augmented with a lot of the AI tools. So the talent, I think we were using, especially brain talents, what we were using as a nation till 2023, not nation, as a world, suddenly changed, because if you carefully look at this talent topic, it's about white collar laborers, right? That's how it's been considered as. They were playing a role of, I think, how would I say, memorize a lot of things. Then whenever there's a question to retrieve, search it, and then you regenerate some articulation thing and then work it out. That's a one way of, I think, key aspect of how this white collar talent has been used, but this has been really challenged. The reason why it has happened was because if you carefully look at World War I to World War II, right, a lot of, I think, research was done in the military area. And after World War II, entire world decided we don't want to have another war. Let's use that knowledge and all these things to take it to the civil society for better perspective. And it was a business. So people are starting a business war, right? That's how it happened. That knowledge has to be absorbed, because that time we didn't have computers, we didn't have search engines, we didn't have generative AI things. So it was done by people. And interestingly, we as a country also, what predominantly we did was we created people who can memorize. So if you go to school, right, to our education system, we have been building people to memorize, generate and write articles. But that skill set is no more required. So hence, I think talent-wise also there's a big changes starting from a doctor to engineer. I think early time, we all have to spend about, say, 60% of our, I think, skill is on that aspect. But that aspect is being augmented or supported by these new AI tools. The rest of the 40%, which we as a country has not really mastered, that particular area now would be worth about now 80 to 90%. That talent development is very important, because that talent development part includes which AI cannot be done, right? Especially in terms of empathy towards people. And as Harsha clearly said, I think the intelligence has few parts, right? Intelligence has human intelligence, group intelligence together, and then data intelligence, and now we talk about artificial intelligence. But we never talk about wisdom, what Harsha was talking. That wisdom still is not being captured by artificial intelligence. That wisdom has to be achieved through different other ways and means, which again Sri Lanka and the South Asia is having that knowledge. And even getting that particular wisdom embedded into our talent is very important. And then naturally there would be a differentiation in talent movement. So still I think we would be talking about talent brain drain. So we can expect very soon a lot of brain gain. Reason is, around the world, if you carefully ask, all these countries suddenly stop this fresh talent coming in, because entry-level people requirements already drop. So there's another reverse opportunity also. But what we have to do is we have to get these startups, get our existing business also into startup culture, do a lot more innovation and experiments. So that is how we can make this talent. Talent is like a nuclear. If you properly, carefully plan and use, you can get them for energy and a lot of value things. Otherwise, it would be a nuclear bomb. So we all have seen, right, as a country, this talent has not been properly managed. 71, we had a talent. So these youngsters, right, they didn't have opportunity. And then the North and East issues also really based on talent and economic opportunities. So hence, talent is a very important topic. So it's much broader than what we think.
But as we speak about talent and brain gain, is Sri Lanka really positioned to create that space for incoming talent or that reverse migration? Is access to capital still a struggle to startups to build, to scale up beyond seed level?
Yeah, so the question is that we as a company, which is the Vega, we actually develop CodeGen. Within that we have about 22, 23. also startups that has been developed, and it's actually we done the risk funding. So now it is only the scale-up capital. So one of the problems is like we need to change the mindset of all the Sri Lankans, because see, most of the economies in this country is about 90 to 95% is a trade economy. You buy from somebody and sell from somebody, buy from somebody and sell from somebody. I mean, our manufacturing economy is very low. So if you go there and look at like few companies like ourselves or somebody else, nobody is going to do a risk capital. That is where that we have lacking. So we are lacking on the risk capital side of it. You know, and then scaling capital, once it is, product is working, when it has been proven in Sri Lanka, and then you can get a lot of scaling capital from a lot of sources, you know, from a lot of countries. So do we have the risk capital? No. You know, there are people, if you go there and say, do we have the money? There are a lot of companies who has the money, but none of them really want to invest on the risk side of the story, but they want to gain the instant money. So if they think that my money can be in risk, you know, they're not going to invest on it. So it's actually kind of a, it's not we don't have the money, we have the money, but we need to make sure that we actually educate them from kind of programs like this. See, like if you go there and look at value of a company, it's their revenue multiplier. So, but Sri Lanka doesn't have anybody that who can actually do a kind of IP valuation. You know, and you know, intellectual copyright, property right, and that kind of valuation, and then also your valuation on your patents and things like that. So because of that reason, you know, we are not, you know, imagine that there is a company in China, and it was called Venus, and which was started about 2 or 3 years ago, and they moved into Singapore, and then they got the first investment, about $50–60 million. And recently they sold it for Meta for about $2.5 billion. I mean, two years you make $2.5 billion. I mean, I can't see the point that why you can't do that one in Sri Lanka. Those can be kind of things you can do it in Sri Lanka. And this is a best and really good era, because now we are moving from normal things to you know, AI, whether you like it or not. So because of that reason, you know, there is a, you know, there is, if you educate the people, I think you can probably get a lot of funding.
As you talk about education and needing to improve that kind of awareness, where do we start here? Is it at school level? Because as you're talking about capital, that people do have money here, but then they don't want to take risks, don't want to invest in startups because you're not aware of your returns. How do we really change this situation?
So the first thing is like, see, what we did was we actually shown by creating supercars and motorbikes and three-wheelers, and we are an industry that never ever Sri Lankan thought that is possible. So, but when we started, somebody started, then you already have a kind of a follower that coming up. So if you go there and see like, you know, like Boss T-shirts, you know, so it's not only the IPR, but also the brand as well. So Boss T-shirts manufactured in Sri Lanka maybe for about $8 or so, and they're selling for about $150. I don't know, $8 to $150 is a huge a margin that they will keep. But why can't we make Boss? So I'm quite glad that you know, people like Carnage, you know, they have actually creating a band, and I was really you know, happy to see brands like that coming up, and then brands like Vega, brands like Electrotech, and brands like you know, like a consumer brands are now starting to come. Then they realize that the brand will also have a value, and also the IPR also has a value, and that has to be recognized. So once that has been recognized, not only the Sri Lankan investors, but also the foreign investors will come and invest in here on a risk capital, as long as we have proven that these guys are capable of doing it. So, but you are not going to go for a concept, but you need to make sure that you will actually have a kind of a working prototype. The people will know that this is really working. I mean, nobody ever builds that we can make batteries in this country. So today we are almost close building a sodium battery, which is like 75–80% of the lithium batteries. So if you pull that one little through, that Sri Lanka will become a battery manufacturing nation that using 80% of the stuff from Sri Lankan minerals and Sri Lankan sourced, you know, the raw material. So these are the things that we are trying our best just to prove it to every one of them. It is possible. So all these years we didn't have that particular thing about these are possible, because always it was actually confined to a certificate. You know, so the people are actually doing something to get a certificate or an award, not for a product. So we want to change this entire certificate culture to a real product and working product culture. So we have not done that for the last decades. I mean, since English left, we haven't done something like that. And today we want to make sure that our education system embracing creating products. Right? I mean, what do you want to really learn about the content? Because you can go to AI and you can actually, I mean, today I can become a doctor, I can become a singer-songwriter, which I wrote a song today, and then I can become an engineer, I can become a scientist, I can become a newscaster, I can become whatever I want using AI. So because of that reason, it's all about your creativity. And as Heminda was saying, it's like creativity that people has, and then also the values and the cultural values and all these things that the people have is the most important part, I think, that we need to develop in or within Sri Lanka.
As we talk about such transformative initiatives taken by Sri Lankan, our very own companies going global, yet I think the rest of the country is yet to learn about these developments, as you rightly say. So I also understand that you work with a lot of startups, young people, scientists, innovators who want to do something bigger. But what's really the obstacle here for them? Apart from policy, do they have enough support to move towards, whether it's whether the understanding to obtain the proper protection for their innovations, their creations, or even what to do in order to solve a problem?
Yeah, so Indeewari now, I've been part of TRACE, so we've been analyzing this entire ecosystem, and what we realize is there are about 11 to 12 problems in Sri Lanka, both, as I mentioned, cultural aspects as well, structural issues as well, which is hindering the startups to grow. Now, for example, Harsha, being a proven entrepreneur, he had put his own money, but everybody can't do that. But there are people maybe who wants to be like Harsha, but they are stopped because you don't have the investment, the right capital, because globally, if you look at all the innovation ecosystems, the biggest venture capitalist is the government. There's no question about it. The biggest venture capitalist in any innovation cluster is the government. So they have to put the money at the level where the people, usual investors won't invest. Because usual investors comes at, we call it the Series A level to Series B level. But the real venture capital money at the very early stage, we call it the Death Valley, comes from the government, which we don't have a model in Sri Lanka. Forget about the investment side, then the protection for those the startups, whether we can, I mean, obviously your revenue cycle starts, if it is a very deep tech based company, startup, it takes some time because you have to first prove the prototype, then takes certain amount of the early whatever the production line will be costly, the per unit cost will be high. Then you have to have the protection for them to come to a certain level, then only they can get the economies of scale and then do the usual paying the tax or whatever you call it. So you have to have that protection period, 1 year, 2 year, whatever period. So that side is not there. Then I know that people are getting to know this certain understanding about the IP and all that, but then transferring the IP or the commercializing the IP is something completely new to Sri Lanka. So this is where the university ecosystem has to support. We need the proper commercial arms, technology transfer arms in every university, which we don't have up to the standards. There are a lot of efforts done last years, but then those were not existing anymore.
What does it mean when you say technology transfer?
So if you take the best universities, Ivy League universities in US or wherever you go, we have this particular unit called the Technology Transfer Office. It's an independent entity under the university, has a independency even from the vice chancellor level. They can decide, okay, this is the IP of the organization. They can decide on whether it's a transfer to a company, another company, or support them from the IP side, generating IP and then the commercialization. So it's a specific cost center. I mean, it's not it's independent cost center funded by the university or the government or whatever. it acts as a supporting unit for IP generation and IP commercialization. That unit is not there in that sense in Sri Lankan universities, both government and private sector. So that's is something that we have to really focus on. So maybe university students during that 2 years or 3 years, they must be generating IPs, but it stays as a maybe document as it is. So we need to focus on that, and the government, if it is a public university, the government has to spend some money on that. If it is a private university, the private university has to spend some money on creating that support for IP generating and commercialization part.
And as we talk about support from the government, does this mean we see the private sector driving the kind of culture, the ecosystem that Sri Lanka requires to take that next leap? But what kind of support do you expect from the government?
I think let me take we are talking about this getting this proper risk capital, right? So risk capital, I think it requires a long-term funding, and we need to have a decent fund management and risk proper analysis and properly investing, not just for your friends, right? It should be evaluated, because the end of the risk is risk, but if you have done the right due diligence, and entire thing should be managed properly. Because in past, Sri Lanka have thrown this government money, probably to some of the friends, to whatever thing, but without evaluating. These should be done in right, proper manner. End of the day, we have to understand, when we invest into 5 companies or 10 companies, I think 4 out of 5, 4 would fail. One is the one which is going to come out. That's the company which Harsha was talking, going to generate that 100x or 150x. But that's a big return. Now, for that particular entire fund management, whether as a country our laws, our regulations, our regulators are allowing, that's a big question. Now again, I told you this particular fund, right? One side it's about the appetite to risk. Second thing is the timing wise. Now long term, so a bank, I think they are always depending on what's the short term borrowings, right? From depositors' money, maybe 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. But where is this long term risk appetite money is there? Go to insurance funds, pension funds. So sitting in an insurance company board, this is something I'm now right now pushing. And I keep on telling, okay, investment is a key part. Today we are only investing. Our regulation is allowing us. Yeah, they have to be, the policyholders' funds and shareholders' funds has to be protected. But at least there should be, because it's all about, the insurance is all about you're taking risk and mitigating risk. For you to do that, you're properly having a risk portfolio, right? Now we don't have that portfolio management capability, as well as our policy is not supportive. Take example, none of our long-term funding, pension fund and insurance fund, from regulator point of view, is allowing to invest into these things. They are not allowing. And take another example, say international risk capital investors, they are ready to bring in that money. How is their, they should be taxed. Imagine now you bring in the money, so you invested into 5 companies. One particular company would generate that whatever the 100x. All the others would, you have to write it off. So is our regulatory frameworks allow us to write off against those 4 failures, cost against that one thing? So today it's not been allowed. So these are the big challenges we as a government we have to do. So getting these things corrected, in addition to this mindfulness, getting the people, everybody culturally fit into this equation.
I think on that note, we'll take a short break here at Hyde Park. We're in conversation with tech leaders, those who have taken Sri Lanka beyond our shores to work with global entities, and we'll come back to talk about whether Sri Lanka needs a national policy, a national startup and innovation driving policy here to support that kind of culture that we're talking about. We'll be right back, to stay with us. Welcome back. We're in conversation with Sri Lanka's tech giants, talking about an innovation culture for Sri Lanka, whether we should look at fostering a startup ecosystem and what kind of support, not just the private sector, but also the government should focus on. I think Dr. Harsha was talking about taxes, that earlier on you mentioned that we have to go into a more comfortable tax structure in Sri Lanka. But here we see Sri Lanka trying to generate revenue to lift Sri Lanka's current survival situation into a more revenue generating mechanism where you have increased taxes than we've seen before. But is this hurting the startup culture that we're talking about?
Yeah, so the first thing is like if you look at current, I understand where the government comes from or the finance ministry comes from. So I don't think that the government or the politician has a bad intention as such, because they also trying to come up with solutions. So, but the thing is like when you come below that, you know, whether we have a very clear economic policy, not the financial policy. We need to have very clear economic policy. So yes, we were kind of a debt-ridden country, so we want to get out of it, and we understand that. But the thing is, like, if you sustain that, whether that has a direct impact on your economic growth. So the problem is, like, if you take a normal person today, they had to pay about 36% in a very low, you know, ceiling. So that you're talking about like $500 or less, you know, and you're starting about 36% taxes. So 36% taxes are starting in America at about $150,000. It's a huge thing, you know, $6,000 to $150,000. So, and whenever you go to Singapore and you go to any other countries, their ceilings are pretty low, pretty high, and then also their taxations are pretty low comparatively. So what happens is, like, if you take Sri Lanka as an example, 36% plus, whatever we buy, I mean, you get the salary, you go there and buy something, and every single thing you buy, you have to pay 18% VAT. So that is 36 plus 8, 54%. So every single thing that we earn, 54% goes to the government, and 46% stays with the person who is actually doing the hard work. But secondly, if you an entrepreneur that will actually make a business and make a profit, and they get 30% taxed, and then 15%, you know, they take the money on the dividends, that's 45%. And add another 18% into that, because every single thing you buy, you go to hotel, you go to restaurant, you go to supermarket, everything is taxed at 18%. So 45, 55, 63%, you're only having 37%. So what happens is, like, if you carry on doing this one, what will happen is, like, the disposable income that the people will have will just barely there to survive, and they would not have extra money to go there and invest. So that can lead into an economic catastrophe in the long term if you don't have carefully planned. And anybody can easily tax every single thing you do. I mean, if you run out of money, you tax them. So what happens is, like, you need to measure what is the implication out at the particular taxation. That's the first thing that we need to understand. That implication for me, in my opinion, is going to be horrendous in years to come, because it's going to, I mean, today we win. We can, I mean, you can take your tax and, you know, you'll be happy to pay the bills. But whether that particular person survives, and they will say, like, let me go to Australia. I mean, that's a disaster for migration of all the skills. They will say, I'll be better off in different countries. And I mean, even if you take the vehicles and every single thing, then they all are pretty high taxes. So you need to, government has to go there and look at different perspectives and different ways of doing this. Secondly, if you go to kind of a, you know, innovations in Sri Lanka, you know, does the government give any priority for Sri Lankan innovations? You know, no. So at the moment, one of the biggest problems we are even suffering is, you get a foreign vehicle comes in here, and then we don't have any priority at all. We go through the same thing. You know, like, you know, if you want to develop the Sri Lankan products, and we have a competitive product that comes into the market, and if the competitive products are actually getting into the market as tax-free, you know, whatever that has been developed in this country, because we need to understand that, you know, we are not kind of a mass-scale manufacturers yet. But if you want to become the mass-scale manufacturers, we need to establish that manufacturing in Sri Lanka properly, and then the volumes will be created, and the quality will be created, then you can go into the external market. In order to do that, the Sri Lanka should support it. So I'll give an example. If you are bringing, you know, we manufacture, you know, the whole, you know, electric, you know, maybe chargers, right? And if you take all that, and if you bring a charge fully, you will not have no taxes. But if you buy the electronic components and build it here, you get taxed for that. So the ones that has been built here will get taxed, and while that has been bring actually without it, doesn't get taxed. So it doesn't make any, so these taxations are not taken into consideration aligned with the economic development in this country. So we as a country, lastly, what we need to do is like we need to move away from a service. So we have a kind of a trade economy right now. This trade economy was killing us for the last 78 years. You know, and we had to move away from the trade economy because product economy. There is no other economy. You know, if you go there and look at China, you look at India, you look at Bangladesh, you look at everywhere, it's a kind of a product economy. And then one of the last thing is like, say for an example, Apple. Apple might get manufactured in China. You know, they get the raw material from Africa. But, you know, African guys will get about maybe $5 or so, and China get about $25 profit. But America will get about $1,000 profit because of the brands. And because of the design was done there, but manufacturing done somewhere else. But do we have that kind of an ecosystem that is being created in here? Because if you go there and say that we hold IPR, there is no policy that the IPR holder get in any tax benefits at all. Do you know that we don't have an R&D policy at all? You know, if you want to do R&D in this country, we have to pay tax and get it. Every component we'll get is about 30%, 35%, 40% tax. So the people might think, you know, am I going to wait for, you know, like 2 months to get it cleared, and we don't have kind of a green channels or nothing. And still, I mean, if you go there and see a guy in Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, he wants to develop something cool, and, you know, he doesn't know how to sell money abroad and bring it back here, and they just give up and say, I can't do this one here. But if I was in UK, then I can go there and, you know, order my parts online, and that will be arriving in your doorstep, and you start doing it. So do we have that kind of ecosystem? We don't. I mean, these are the things that the government or any government in the previously would have done to create a very cool R&D policy, and also give a priority for Sri Lankan products. And so the Sri Lankan products can mature in the Sri Lanka. Once that has been matured, then it can go into the international market. And then we need to give some kind of favoritism to Sri Lankan products, and which is not in any other charters at all. So finally, we have to move our economy for a product and high-end services economy. And if you do that, you know, it's just like one more example. We are having herbal medicines. Those herbal medicines market is about $1 trillion. Right, $500 million to $1 trillion market. Sri Lanka, India, and those are the 2-3 countries that has a traditional medicines for the last thousands of years. And we take about 20% of the market, or 10-20% of the market. So that's about $100 billion market. I mean, if you have a traditional medicine over here, because I use it, I've actually been a I was taking traditional medicines for the last 19 years. I haven't taken any Western medicine at all. And I've been surviving. And so we have all these kind of medicines which does miracles. Right? People never done any research work. I done 19 years of research work on that. So that is actually better than a pharma company's one. So like a sort of Western medicine. So do we have any system that take our valuable herbal medicine to become a pharma medicine or to make a pharma company? If you do that, we already have 1,000 years of testing. You don't need to do rats testing and all that. It's already been tested and it's already been given to people. So that particular market we can easily capture. Even 10% of that market, you're talking about $100 billion. You know, where are we taking any steps to do that? So that is my thing. So Sri Lanka is actually a debted country. It's like $28 billion to $30 billion foreign debt. It's a very small amount. I even told the governments and every government, I'm not talking about this government, all the governments, you know, even if you do that, take the 2 years of profits and pay the entire debt of Sri Lanka. Right? So that is something that I'm trying to tell you, that Sri Lanka should not be a poor debted country whatsoever. Because of our stupidity and naivety is where we are here right now today.
Interesting and also valuable comments. Of course, on this show, we've been talking about 2027, 2028, when we have to start repaying debt. But as I understand, you have been creating startups, building an ecosystem that can transform Sri Lanka's economy in just the next 2 years. But We spoke about taxes, Heminda. I'd like to talk about subsidies and investments, attracting investments to Sri Lanka. Are we deterring them? Are we giving enough support? Are we attractive enough for them to come up? Because not too far away from Sri Lanka, we see large tech cities building up, and we don't even see the spillover coming to Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so I told that Sri Lanka strategically located in a place where investment should come, but then globally investors will look at, okay, what I'm getting. If say Vietnam is offering something, or if Singapore is offering something, they will compare. What are my chances, apple to apple comparison? And they don't want to support Sri Lanka. They look at the best country to invest. So I don't think we have given the real benefits for the investors, both locally or globally. So I'll give you a few examples. I mean, I'm coming from more startup ecosystem based. Now, if you look at, if an investor from outside Sri Lanka want to invest in Sri Lankan startup, globally there are models. For example, there's a model called SAFE model. SAFE model where you invest in the startup, but you can kind of it's in a model where you can get the share at a later time, and then it's basically you can, in the next investment round, you can get a better share after that. So these models are not in Sri Lanka. So SAFE model is everywhere. I mean, if you go to US, if you go to anywhere, even India, it has. Then if I'm a investor, what is the benefit that I'm getting? For example, I mean, you don't have to go to any other country. Go to India. India, vast. I mean, it's the development in investment ecosystem in India is phenomenal. So if you are an investor in India, if you registered investor in India, you get tax benefit for all the transactions that you do, the investment you give to startups, or the startups connected to the startup incubators. These all three: investor, startup, and the incubator. All the transactions are tax-free now in India. So this is Sitaraman's policy. Then if you look at the last union budget, there's a massive amount of government investment were given for electronic industry. They call it Electronic Industry 2.0 of India. So we don't have to go to US, we don't have to go to the so-called developed countries. Even the other so-called developing countries also now have right policies. We just need to follow that. So the investor attraction, even though we have the strategically good place, we don't have the apple-to-apple comparison. The support that we give from our end is very low compared to other countries. Then we need to look at the kind of models that are developed in other countries. I mean, take how South Korea was developed. South Korea's model for development in the last 50 years were the government supported all the big entrepreneurs. And what they did was not for their usual business. For example, Samsung was 70 years ago, it was a trading company. But what the government said was, we don't give the money for your trading business. But if you do, we call it leapfrogging. For example, you are today getting a Japanese electronic device and sell it in your trading company. But you start developing electric equipments in South Korea, government will support. So that was the model that Samsung was created. I mean, Samsung 50 years ago, it was a known brand in South Korea, but nobody knew. But today it's a global, maybe the largest consumer electronics company, because the government supported for that leapfrogging part.
And China as well.
China as well.
China
as well, yes. And then if you look at the other examples, for example, Israel to Singapore to all that, they supported the startups. So they had an entire government support for startups, not only as investment, but looking at the markets and the venture capital model, enabling them the market space, all that. So I think we don't have a model like that. So both investors as well as the market space, giving the market space for the startup. So I think you don't have to recreate anything. You just need to follow, just follow the Indian model. What they are really doing for startups to. So there was a recently where there's a Chinese investors came to Trace, and we showed Trace all that, and then they were thinking that this was all given free. But that's a Chinese model. For a real innovation-based ecosystem, startups to entrepreneurs, they are giving everything free of charge. And they thought they were also giving. Of course, our model is different, but at least there should be benefits for all not the buy and selling entrepreneurs, the people who really create value, innovations, IPs. The government should support giving the land, giving the tax benefits to all that. Yeah.
Is there lack of awareness among government or knowledge here from government to government, not just one specific government, that there is such a proven system? There is a system that works in India. There's a system that has worked for South Korea, something that worked for China. And their products are the world's largest, biggest selling products. So what's the missing link here?
I think one is you need to have you can't change policies. Like one government to one government, you can't change policies. So if you come up with a policy, you have to stick to it, whatever the government. So I think that's one thing that we should be very careful of. And the second one is, of course, you can't say that the Indian model or the Chinese model or the model will suit Sri Lanka, but then there are models that you can look at and have our own model. So usually in 80% of the countries, certain models worked. So we should adapt those models as well, which we don't do. Investment to, building startups to supporting startups.
I mean, I have one thing.
Yes,
sorry
yes,
about
of course.
The reason is like, see, what happens is like any government that moves from one to another, that is not the issue. There are set of people in the government who are advising the governments. See, the biggest problem is like, it is partly your kind of media to be blamed as well. So if you go there and see, I mean, you are actually trying to make something positive, right? So, but most of the time, if you go there and write a song, the song is about negative, like somebody has left this woman and the woman cries and somebody goes there. And then again, if you make a teledrama, it's all about that man left it and woman left and all that kind of stuff. And it's about, you call it like every single thing about the sadness and the sadness and the sadness. And if you go there and start up a news, and it says like there is an accident and 10,000 people died and all that kind of stuff. So, and you always start with a negative and negative and negative and negative, right? So your news start with negative, right? Have you ever seen your news starting in positive? No, it's negative. Have you ever had, say, like CodeGen has manufactured the most powerful motor bicycle in the world and da-da-da? No. You start with like, there is a bicycle accident and 3 people died and all that. And so in Sinhala, it's called Duka Choon Karagan inne. Duka Choon Karagan puluwan ekama nation එක තමයි Sri Lankans, right? So because of that reason, the government also get the advice, පිස්සුද සර් ඔව කොහොමද කරන්නේ ලංකාවේ ඔව කරන්න බෑ ලංකාවේ මේ කාර් හදන්නේ කොහෙද ලංකාවේ ඕක අපි පිටරටින් ගියමු ඔයා නිකන් අමාරු වෙටනවා ඊගා එක්කෙනාට ගිහිල්ලා පිස්සුද සර් ඔව ලංකාවේ කරන්න බෑ කියපුවාම. So this negative attitude has penetrated all the way up to the government. So unless government leader says like, screw you, I'm going to do exactly what I want. I don't want to listen to you, I don't want to listen to you. I want to make exactly what I'm telling you to do. So if that happens, then you don't have these negative people going to come behind you. So that's what I mean. Heminda, I'm just studying up what you asked the question from.
I think we'd like to hear from you as well, Sankalpa. From that positive, creating that positive culture, you spoke about cultural changes as much as structural changes we require. And here we hear about the negativity that thrives in Sri Lanka culturally.
I think negativity.
But I want you to also maybe touch on research and development. With very little done, there's something that we see that all of you do with your companies. We see your companies in Canada, USA, and other parts of Sri Lanka as well. And we see much needed foreign exchange generated. But how come we don't make it possible here?
Okay, right. I think Harsha very nicely articulated, because culture, how you set your culture, right? If you set your culture, there are certain cultures, certain countries, certain tribes, their cultures are meant for certain positivity. They naturally build, I think, merchants, traders, investors. Why? I think we have to ask that question. Why we as a nation keep on going bad to worst? Whereas those countries goes in good to great, right, Harsha?
Exactly.
So very important question. And second, so I think we'll leave that question, and maybe to all media give a thought. I think Trace supported to build 2 documentary films, movies. One about entrepreneur, which was done by one of our Trace ex-directors. So that similar, I think, why couldn't she took a chance and did that movie with the help of something. It went, I think it went very well, right? One movie, I don't want to mention that name, but in another channel. Why couldn't others copy that positiveness? And similarly, I think we all have to, as Harsha said, move from, I think, a great winning habit. Today we are seeing always, even cricket, right? We had a 1996, we went into that winning habit. But even cricket, it's not winning habit, right? It was being taken over by total different unseen set of people, and I think they may be making more money from the losing side. That may be the reason, I don't know, honestly speaking. I think, can we take that example even into our economy? There can be a set of, Harsha, as you said, economists too. Maybe to government officers, to maybe to some business people, to whatever, whoever the people, they may be making money out of this total negative spiral of our economy. They may be the people who may be preventing whatever the government scheme, right? We have seen all different governments. We were working with Mahinda Rajapaksa's government, then with Ranil Wickremesinghe Maitripala Sirisena government as traced, then with Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and with the Yahapalane, whatever, thereafter the transition government, and with this government. All government, all politicians come to us, they talk, they believe what we talk. But after that, they hand it over to the set of officials in this country. Whereas you hand it over to Indian officials or to another country, I think they somehow take it positively. Nothing we discuss has not been materialized. The taxes to everything, they politically everyone agreed, right? But practical implementation doesn't happen. So my take is, let's try to take us back to that 1996 cricket winning mode for all areas. So let's get into that one.
Right, I think I'm told that's all the time we have on the show, but thank you very much for joining us. We were in conversation with Dr. Harsha Subasinghe, again a technology entrepreneur who has taken Sri Lankan ventures globally and made Sri Lanka proud. We also have with us Mr. Heminda Jayaweera, who supports startups, an innovation ecosystem and a digital transformation strategist and expert. We also had joining us Dr. Sankalpa Gamwarige, an investment innovation leader who works with high growth ventures here in Sri Lanka and the rest of the world. Thank you very much for joining us here at Hyde Park. We were in conversation with not just entrepreneurs, but also architects of Sri Lanka's innovation ecosystem as we talk about whether Sri Lanka can leapfrog innovation, growth, and build Sri Lanka's economy to meet future challenges. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week with yet another conversation. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.